네, 안녕하세요. 바다군이 알려준 호주 바다군입니다. 오늘 호주 대사관에서 코로나 바이러스 코비드 19이라고 하죠. 관련해가지고 이제 웨비나를 진행할 예정이고요. 저희 바다주에서 호주 대사관의 허가를 받아서 실시간으로 중계를 해드릴 예정입니다. 잠시 후 2시부터 진행될 예정이고요. 이번 세미나는 주한호주대사관 비작과 주한호주대사관 교육부, 호주상공에 같이 진행이 될 예정이고요. 호주 대사님 인사말부터 시작으로 진행이 될 예정으로 알고 있습니다. 지금 한창 준비 중이신 걸로 보이고요. 준비가 되는 대로 이제 진행을 시작을 해드리도록 하겠습니다. 요즘에 이제 코로나 때문에 호주 국경이 사실상 막힌 상황이고, 호주 영주권자 시민권자, 그중 영주권자 시민권자도 특별한 사유가 아닌 이상 호주 나오는 거 들어가는 거 전부 다 어려운 상황이고, 이런 상황이라서 지금 현재 상황이고 호주 유학을 계획하시는 분들은 어떠한 스탠스를 취하셔야 되는지, 그 다음에 학생 비자를 고려하시는 분들은 이제 호주 현지 학생 비자를 갖고 계신 분들은 어떻게 이 학생 비자를 해 나가셔야 되는지에 대한 부분들을 오늘 이런 이 주한호주 대사관의 세미나를 통해서 조금 어느 정도 해결이 되시지 않을까 생각을 해봅니다. 이번 오늘 세미나 되는 주제는 방금 떴었는데 사라졌다. 지금 계획이 나와 있는데 조금 이따 다시 설명을 해주실 거니까 그거 보고 하면 되지 않을까 싶어요. 지금 바로 연결을 한번 해볼게요. 계획이 나와 있는데 조금 이따 다시 설명을 해주실 거니까 준비가 된 건가? 2시가 됐으니까 넘겨보겠습니다.
Great. Yes. Terrific. Okay, thank you very much for logging in today to all the education agents and for your ongoing support for the Australian international education sector. We greatly appreciate it. This afternoon, what I plan to do is just to give you a brief overview of recently announced Australian government policies affecting international students in the context of COVID-19. And specifically, I want to outline some new support measures, including financial and welfare support, flexibility and regulations relating to international education, and tuition protection for students. You're already on the next slide. Thank you. With respect to international student support, look, as education agents, I'm confident that you know that Australia's international education sector is a vital part of Australia's economy. But what I really want to underscore is how greatly valued international students are. They are members of the Australian community who enrich our society in so many ways, particularly in the people-to-people links that are developed between countries like Australia and Korea. And as the Ambassador said, we're really committed to the health, safety and well-being of international students in Australia. And we recognise that this is a challenging time for international students and their families who really make a significant sacrifice to embark upon a world-class education in Australia. And while we've always prided ourselves on being a safe and welcoming multicultural country, we really have to band together and support each other and look out for each other in times that are challenging like this one. The Australian government really thinks of ourselves as having a shared responsibility with respect to supporting our international student community. And that's across all the education providers, all levels of government, the accommodation providers and the other service providers throughout Australia's community. And whilst the majority of Australia's international students will continue to have sufficient funds from their families and other funding networks, COVID-19 really is a global pandemic that is impacting us all. So to that end, the Australian government really is continuing to work with the international education sector to minimise the impact of COVID-19, and that includes finding innovative ways to support our international students. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Financial support. So the Australian government recognises that financial support measures during this challenging time can be vital for international students to be able to continue their education in Australia. So students who have been in Australia longer than 12 months, who find themselves in financial hardship, are able to access their Australian superannuation, as Ron mentioned, and more information is available on this on the Australian Tax Office website, which is listed there on the slide for you. And all international students are really encouraged to stay in touch with their education providers about the range of support which is available to them at this time. Many universities and other education providers are offering a raft of different support measures, and they include things such as fee deferrals, deferred studies or payments, food and accommodation support, and mental health and other support. And some of these examples include things such as Deakin University offering $25 million for targeted support for international students, a pledge by Australian National University of $21 million to assist students. Monash University has a $15 million package that offers $7,500 per student and $500 in emergency grants. There's been support packages established by Flinders University to the value of $12.5 million, RMIT University $10 million, and Curtin University $8 million. And Western Sydney University has announced a 10% reduction in fees for current international students. Next slide, please. So the Australian government has decided to extend the 40-hour per fortnight limit on international students working, and this applies to international students working in critical sectors. My colleague Amanda from Home Affairs will provide greater detail about these provisions shortly, but for now I'll just note that these critical sectors include nurses and aged carers, as well as those international students working in major supermarkets, helping to keep shelves stocked. Next slide, please. Assurances have been made around rental accommodation for all residents in Australia, and this includes international students. These assurances have been bolstered. As mentioned earlier, the Prime Minister recently announced that tenants are protected from eviction for a 6-month period, and this means essentially between April to September. These 6-month measures that the Australian government is talking about refers to the June and September quarter. So this is essentially between April and September. And the Prime Minister mentioned that he expects landlords and tenants to work together to agree arrangements during this period. He's essentially asked us all to be sensible adults, to sit down and have a conversation. And these arrangements are equally applicable to international students. So the arrangements will be overseen at the state and territory level by the relevant authority listed on the slide for each jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So we also have a range of state government support that has recently been announced, and these support measures quite often go to the support of employment options, but they are equally available for international students. In Victoria, the Victorian government has announced the Working for Victoria Fund, and this is to help Victorians who have lost their jobs due to the economic impacts of COVID-19 to find new opportunities, and this includes international students. They also have a 2-week supply of food and personal packages delivered to Victorians who don't have access to essential supplies. And they include those who don't have a network of family and friends, and that could equally include international students, and this is being delivered by the Red Cross and Food Bank. They also have online delivery through the Study Melbourne Student Centre services and financial assistance in the form of rent relief and food vouchers for vulnerable students. New South Wales has an international student legal service that it's established to support international students with free advice about enrolment, accommodation, health and wellbeing. In South Australia, they've announced a $13.8 million support package to assist with a jobs fund, a community jobs fund, which provides further funding or top-up funds. And those funds are being made available by the University of Adelaide, Flinders University and the University of South Australia. And each university will distribute the funds to international students both currently enrolled or studying in a pathway course who are suffering hardship. In Queensland, an additional $1 million to increase student support services to help impacted students return to study. In Western Australia, Study Perth is establishing their Study Perth Crisis Relief, and this is a grant funding pool to address acute needs of international students, and that's accessible via an application to Study Perth. In Tasmania, additional funding has been provided in the form of by community organisations to help with emergency food relief and support, equally applicable to international students. In the Northern Territory, a jobs rescue and recovery plan to assist casuals and international students with being able to maintain employment, and these grants are delivered by Study Northern Territory. And then finally, in the ACT, Jobs for Canberrans is a fund to allow the ACT government directorates to continue to employ people for various casual work, including international students. Next slide, please. In terms of healthcare services, the Australian government's aware of the impact of COVID-19 and international students, and is particularly cognizant of the additional burden associated with the geographical distance between international students and their family and friends. And to that end, the Department of Education, Skills and Employment's website outlines a range of mental health and other support services available to international students. In addition, international students are encouraged to contact their overseas student cover provider for on health cover and services such as counselling and other mental health support. And a student's health cover may help them access or meet the costs of medical and hospital care while in Australia. And it should be noted that this advice is confidential and will not affect their visa conditions or their enrolment. Next slide, please. In terms of regulation, the Australian government's committed to ensuring that quality education services are provided to international students, and to that end, it's really acted quickly in partnership with regulators to assure that providers of a flexible, we're providing a flexible approach to regulation, considering the impact of COVID-19 on all staff and students. And the measures to date have included not enforcing limits for online delivery to international students, and allowing for compassionate and compelling circumstances to be applied to student enrolment deferrals or suspensions, as well as extending timeframes for regulatory obligations and working to support the continued delivery and assessment through adaptive measures wherever possible. And all these measures are designed to make it easier for education providers to focus on supporting students enrolled at their institution during this challenging time. Regulators are also providing additional support to education providers who are transitioning to online delivery to students in Australia or offshore. And this is taking place through the provision of advice and guidance and access to material relating to the maintenance of quality learning and student wellbeing in an online setting. Next slide, please. And then in terms of tuition protection for students, the Australian government really wants to reassure international students and agents that tuition protection for students is not affected by COVID-19. The normal procedures apply, and in fact, the TPS is looking to assist students as rapidly as possible. Agents, of course, should not interfere in any student placement processes, and the TPS strongly encourages agents to not take commissions from students or replacement providers in the case of a provider closure. And we really want to encourage agents to report any intelligence that you might have on providers in trouble or who are closing to the TPS. And that email provided on the slide, operations@tps.gov.au, is the one that we'd be grateful for you to use. So before handing over to my colleague Amanda, I just want to reiterate that Australia really continues to welcome the presence of international students in Australia. And during these challenging times, we encourage students to ensure they're both financially and emotionally supported, and utilising the full range of support measures that's been introduced by the Australian government and education providers. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Peter, and thank you, agents, for joining us today on this webinar where we provide updates on how the Australian government is managing COVID-19 and what this means for our Korean international students. As a representative of the Department of Home Affairs, I will provide you with updates on Australia's border control measures and Australian visas. Thank you for providing your questions ahead of the webinar. Where possible, I have addressed these questions within my presentation today. Some matters you have raised may be under consideration for policy change. If you have questions at the end of the webinar on our visa or border measures, you can contact us through our online immigration inquiry form that I will include as a web link at the end of the presentation. Next. So today I will cover Australia's current border arrangements, the impact on visa applications made overseas, students outside of Australia, impact on visa applications from those in Australia, special arrangements for students who are in Australia, policy work to provide flexibility and concessions for our visas, and highlight services that are available to our Korean students, as well as education agents who need further information on visa options and visa conditions. There is a lot of content on my slides, and I understand that a copy of the presentation will be provided to you afterwards that you can read over in your own time. So, COVID-19 has affected us worldwide as a pandemic. In March, approximately 80% of COVID-19 cases identified in Australia were either the result of someone who had contracted the virus overseas or someone who had direct contact with someone who had returned from overseas. So in an effort to slow the spread of COVID-19, Australia has introduced travel restrictions. As the Ambassador and Ron have mentioned, we are seeing the rate of new COVID-19 cases drastically drop in Australia and Korea. That is promising news. But for now, we need to maintain these travel restrictions. There are exemptions in place to help people return to Australia, including Australian citizens, permanent residents, and their immediate family members. The Australian Border Force Commissioner has special discretion to approve exemption on exceptional and compelling cases. People who fall within this category can make a request through the Department of Home Affairs webpage on COVID-19. However, temporary visa holders such as students and working holiday makers cannot travel to Australia at this time unless they present with exceptional reasons. Australia is not alone in its efforts to slow down COVID-19. Other countries have introduced stricter border control measures, including the Republic of Korea, to flatten the curve with COVID-19. We must all do our part in helping slow the spread of the virus. So the department is prioritising offshore visa applications for those travellers in exempt categories to support urgent travel. For those who have outstanding visa applications before the department and currently overseas, we will be flexible in extending timeframes for information or to undergo checks such as medical. Where possible, we will also use our discretion to extend the validity of some checks. For example, medical results for a visa are valid for 12 months. If the medical result is due to expire and where there are no residual health concerns, such as tuberculosis, we have the discretion to extend the validity of this health check for a further 6 months. Lodgement channels will remain open for those that want to apply for a visa, but it is important to understand the difficulties students will have in receiving a visa decision while travel restrictions are in place. Okay. Students unable to return to Australia to continue their studies may need to have their study deferred. This will not affect their visa status. If students commence an Australian course of study overseas and proceed to study online, they do not need a visa for Australia. They only need a visa when they intend to enter Australia. Once travel restrictions are lifted, students who hold a valid visa will be able to enter Australia. The Department of Home Affairs does not regulate mode of study requirements for international students. Online study, either offshore or onshore, will not impact student visa compliance. Next slide. The department is prioritising processing visa applications for those who are in Australia. This is to make sure that they remain lawful in Australia. While we aim to prioritise visa applications for those currently in Australia, please keep in mind that there are different processing times for our visa subclasses. Under Australian migration law, it is not possible to extend a student visa. Students will need to apply for a new visa if they cannot return to their home country and their visa is expiring, or they need more time in Australia to complete their course. Students should apply for a new student visa 6 weeks before the existing student visa expires. There is no need to provide evidence of impacts of COVID-19 with the student visa application. If their study in Australia is ending, they can apply for other visas such as the visitor visa, subclass 600. They need to do this before the student visa expires. For those applying for a further student visa, some services relating to the visa process may be unavailable, for example, medical checks. While these services are limited, many applicants in Australia may be unable to meet the visa requirements. Students will be given additional time to complete checks and provide requested information. When a student applies for a new visa, they will be issued with a bridging visa. The bridging visa will allow a person to remain lawfully in Australia while they await the outcome of the new visa application. Other visa options are also available on the Department of Home Affairs website for students to explore if a visitor visa or student visa does not suit their purpose of stay. So the Australian government is taking a flexible approach in relation to student visa conditions where COVID-19 restrictions have prevented conditions being met, such as class attendance or use of online learning. If a course is out of session, a student visa holder can work unlimited hours. Courses are considered out of session during scheduled course breaks or if a student has finished their course as scheduled. If a student visa holder is studying a Masters by Research or doctorate course, they may work unlimited hours. If the course has been deferred, a student visa can work over 40 hours per fortnight. Certain student visa holders can work more than 40 hours per fortnight to support the supply of essential goods and services for Australians if they are employed in the nursing sector, employed by registered supermarkets, and employed in aged care sector. For those working in the supermarket, from 1 May 2020, this will change, and students will only be able to work 40 hours per fortnight. For more information on essential services where extended working hours are available, please visit the Department of Home Affairs website on COVID-19. There is a list of registered businesses that are considered for those special arrangements, so students can check that list. Okay. The department has put a number of policy considerations to the Australian government, including waivers to visa application charges and eligibility concessions for the temporary graduate visa. Refunds for visa application charges are only available in limited circumstances. Refunds are not currently available to students affected by travel restrictions. Several policy measures to support temporary visa holders have already been announced by the Australian government, such as the flexible approach in relation to student visa conditions. A guiding principle is that students should not be impacted adversely by COVID-19. Issues and circumstances raised by the industry have all been registered and form parts of these considerations. Announcements will be made to you once decisions are taken by the Australian government. From an operational perspective, we are looking to apply full flexibility. Now, we did receive a question from the Education Agents Group in regards to concessions for working holiday makers who are unable to travel to Australia at this time or who have recently departed and unable to return. Again, the department is taking into consideration a number of these matters impacting visa holders across the temporary visa program. Any policy change to visas will be published on our Department of Home Affairs website. So I encourage you all to continue checking the website for further updates. Okay, next slide. So COVID-19 has been a rapidly evolving matter, and where the Australian government continues to make regular updates to our visa and control measures. It is important that international students regularly check the Home Affairs website for the latest information with visa options and visa conditions, including policy changes. When you go to the Department of Home Affairs homepage, there is an icon titled COVID-19. So the webpage contains a number of categories relating to Australian immigration and border arrangements during COVID-19 outbreak. The information that I have presented today on international students leaving Australia and students staying in Australia is available on this website against those tiles. So as you can see, highlighted in red, the updates and information are available in many languages, including Korean. We have a telephone service available to our visa clients and the education agents, both in Korea and Australia, called the Global Service Centre. Language support services are available during business hours, Monday to Friday. So students can select option 6 at the start of the call for language support. We have moved to a digital platform for visa inquiries. If you have a specific visa matter you wish to discuss with the Australian Embassy, you can contact us through the Australian Immigration Inquiry Form. This has replaced our mailbox. If you have visa or border questions after this webinar, you can also direct these through the Australian Immigration Inquiry Form. So thank you very much for your time, and I will now pass over to Ron Green with the closing remarks.
Thank you, Amanda. So just by way of conclusion, I wanted to touch on the direction that we want to be taking both in international education, but also here in Korea. As the ambassador mentioned, we were planning to have a study in Australia, event here in May 22nd, I think, was scheduled out at COEX. There's obviously been cancelled because of COVID, but it doesn't mean we're not thinking about the future. So the next slide, if you put it up, focuses on the areas. There's actually 9 areas of activity that we're coordinating across the whole of government in order to present a cohesive strategy towards our international education plan that was announced for 2025. So if you recall back in the task force area, that is also focused on what are we going to do towards 2025 in international education. And the work that we're doing today is feeding into that. There's a number of important initiatives, however, and today's webinar, for instance, is an example of what we'll be doing more of in the future. I also like to draw your attention to our new approach to events in the future, and that's the areas circled. So to the next slide. So the future of study in Australia events here in Korea will be this form of presenting. I've seen a dummy event organised, but it's very professional. You'll get an agenda, you'll see speakers, there'll be handouts. It'll be powered probably by Zoom or something like that. There'll be an opportunity for Q&A. And I think that's going to be the future for our events here in Korea. And it'll be both B2C and B2B type access. So that's what we're planning. And I'd encourage you to give us feedback if you have any concerns or you're supportive of this process. And we'll look forward to the opportunity of presenting this more formally to you in the near future. But do not hesitate to let us know what you think about this sort of forum. So to the simple messages that we want you to take away today, you're not alone. We are in this together, and Australia is here to support you, and we welcome your feedback as we move ahead, and we look forward to doing more interactive webinars in the future. We're committed to ensuring that international students, whether arriving or already in Australia, have access to the right information, support and care, and encourage you to use the resources that we provided you today, including the app. A message to every student is that you can feel secure and confident that your study experience in Australia will be rewarding. Australia is safe, inclusive and supportive study environment where you continue to feel welcomed and inspired. Australia is friendly and welcoming country where you join more than 500,000 students who have been welcomed into Australian life. And encourage you therefore to visit the Study in Australia website and also follow this in this together tag hashline. So that's all we wanted to present to you today. As I said, we'll be forwarding this presentation to you at the conclusion, but encourage further feedback going forward and look forward to the next opportunity to be able to engage with you here in Korea. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, speakers. Thank you.
그냥 끝나버리네요. 초반에 오디오 에러 조금 있었는데 지금 중요한 얘기들은 다 정리가 된 것 같아서 슬라이드 같이 나왔으니까 그쪽으로 많이 도움이 되셨으면 좋겠고요. 다음에 관련해서 컨텐츠로 한번 찾아뵐게요. 지금까지 바다군이 살려주는 바다군이었습니다. 감사합니다.